everybody, this is Carter, and welcome to what is going to be a very special episode of Making It Up. I am so glad that you are here, and this is going to be a little bit of a different intro, because the episode that we're about to play is actually my first ever live version of Making It Up. And I didn't interview one, no, I interviewed 3 authors live on stage at the Broomfield auditorium back in mid-September. So it was a very cool night. You know, the library had reached out to me a number of months ago wanting to do some kind of cool event. And we came up with just doing a live version of Making It Up. So we had to look for, a panel of 3 local authors that I could talk to. And so we came up with the lovely and talented R. Allen Brooks, Emily Littlejohn, and Erika T. Wurth. And I'm not going to discuss their bios right now because I give a full introduction to the guests in the live version of the episode as well. So you can just listen to that. But, oh man, it was fun. It was a big ass auditorium, which was nice big stage, very professionally done and recorded and edited and whatnot. And, as per usual, I didn't do a ton of research. I knew a couple of my guests already. But, I had a couple questions lined up, but mostly we just freewheeled it. I waited to see what their responses were and kind of based my next questions on that. And the hour flew by, as you can imagine, with 3 people there. And then, of course, we had to make up a story in front of the entire studio audience. So that was very exciting. So I hope you like this one. This was a blast to record, and let me know in the comments if you think I should be doing more live episodes, but it was a lot of fun. So this is my conversation with R. Allen Brooks, Emily Littlejohn, and Erika T. Wurth. Enjoy. Good evening. Welcome to this very special live edition of the Making It Up podcast. I've never done a live version before. I've never had a podcast with 3 guests, so I'm super excited for this. And I'm so thrilled that you all took time out of your day in the rain to come out to listen to us tonight. We're going to have a great conversation, but just to contextualize a little bit about what the Making It Up podcast is. So I started it about 2.5 years ago. I surveyed the landscape of a million podcasts and decided my voice needed to be heard as well. And the truth is, I love listening to podcasts where they're interviewing somebody and they're going through their personal journey, when they're finding out, how did this person become who they became? I love that. So I decided I wanted to do that with writers. I wanted to invite writers to my show, writers of all background, and just talk about their personal journey. Because, writing is such an interesting and challenging field to be in. I'm always curious, why the hell did you decide that you wanted to do this? And there's 2 reasons that I call it the Making It Up podcast. First of all, I do very little research. I book a guest. Either the guest comes to me through a PR agency or I seek them out. And I know who they are. I read about them, but I don't do a lot of research about them. I don't read their books. I don't want to talk to them necessarily about their books. I want to talk to them about who they are. So I almost act like I just met this person at a cocktail party, found them interesting, pulled them to the side, and just started asking them a lot of questions. So this will be a very free-flowing conversation tonight. The second reason it's called Making It Up is at the end of every single episode, I pick a random book off my bookshelves. The guest gives me a page number. I choose a sentence from that page. I read that sentence out loud, and then we start crafting on the spot a short story, starting with that first sentence. We are going to do that tonight. So we're going to spend about 45 minutes talking, and then we're going to wrap up doing a live version of the disaster that is known as the Making It Up portion of the show. So I want to go ahead and introduce my 3 amazing guests first, and then we'll start just digging into the questions. So to my left right here is R. Allen Brooks. R. Alan Brooks teaches graphic novel writing for Regis University's MFA program and Lighthouse Writers Workshop. He is the author of The Burning Metronome and Anguish Garden, graphic novels featuring social commentary. His award-winning weekly comic for the Colorado Sun, titled What Did I Miss?, has been praised for its direct engagement with social issues. His TED Talk on the importance of art reached 1 million viewers within the first 2 months. Amazing. And his graphic novel work is featured in the Denver Art Museum's renovated Western exhibit. Alan, welcome. So, his left is Emily. Emily Littlejohn is a 2-time Colorado Book Award finalist for the Gemma Monroe Mystery Series. She's an avid reader, a procrastinating writer, a loving wife and mom, and a recovering librarian. Her latest novel, a standalone thriller, is currently out in submission. I will tell you, it's awesome. So it is going to sell, and it's going to be big. I had the pleasure of taking a look at it. A couple small facts about, fun facts about Emily. We both grew up in the small Los Angeles suburb of in Southern California, and we both share the same literary agent who's in New Orleans. So it is definitely a small world when I met Emily out here. And Erika Wurth. So Erika T. Wurth's novel, White Horse, is a New York Times editor's pick, which is a really big deal, in case you didn't know, a Good Morning America Buzz pick, and an Indie Next Target Book of the Month and BOTM pick. She's both a Kenyon and Sewanee Fellow and is published in the Kenyon Review, BuzzFeed, and the Writer's Chronicle, and is a narrative artist for the Meow Wolf Denver installation, which is fantastic. I'd love to know more about that. She's an urban native of Apache, Chickasaw, and Cherokee descent. Erika, welcome.
All right. I want to take a seat.
So Alan and I were just talking about, the struggles of being an artist of any form. But also, what did you say? You said it was good for the soul, right? So you want to do this for the rest of your life.
Definitely. Yeah. I think we talked about working jobs that we hate. Before I was a writer, I was an insurance agent. And I had the thought, if I die right now, I would die as an insurance agent.
Hopefully you had insurance.
Right.
So what was that moment? What was that moment when you said, because you said you've been supporting yourself as an artist for the last 5 years. What was that moment where you're like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to give it a try and see what happens. I'm asking for a friend.
So around 2016, I had been doing insurance for 4 years. And there's this thing, like when you're selling insurance, people, they nickel and dime you. They're like, can I take this off? Can I take this off? Can I take this off? And then you say, well, if you take this off, when something happens, you're not going to have coverage. And then invariably that thing would happen and they would blame me. And, I'm okay with people being mad with me about things I actually believe in, but not insurance,
Right.
So it really kind of like took a toll on me emotionally, even though intellectually I knew it wasn't my fault. And I did it. I went to Europe for the first time for a month.
Wow.
And I went to Prague, Budapest, Berlin, and London and did comic book stuff in all those places. And when I came back, I was like, all right, if I have to choose between being wealthy and miserable or happy and broke, I'll choose happy and broke. So I shut down the insurance agency and I was like, I'm going to write comic books.
And do you still have that 5 years in? Do you still have that attitude?
Yeah, I would say, I was choosing between two terrible extremes, and I was hoping it wouldn't be those two extremes. And I would say that I've been fortunate that it hasn't been. Like, a lot of great things happened once I made the choice. And, we can talk about that journey at some point. I just want to make sure I'm not.
Yeah. Well, it's funny how much of it is mindset. Eric, I'm curious from you, when I talk to writers, I always feel like if you're born to be a writer or born to be in the arts, it's going to come out at some point, despite all your best efforts to do something practical and smart with your life. What was that journey like for you? Did you know early on that you wanted to pursue that kind of life, or did you get dragged into it kicking and screaming somehow?
I knew, but my parents were very unhappy about it.
Yeah.
But I was like a super nerdy kid. Like, someone tried to give me a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird once, and I was like, where are the dragons? You know, I was just very unhappy.
I think Boo Radley was technically a dragon.
Yeah. So, and then, you know, I, for some reason, very young, I was like, I really want to be a writer. That's what I want to do. And I had no idea what that meant, though, because my parents had become middle class, but they were from very poor backgrounds. And then I went to school in Idaho Springs, Colorado, which is pretty humble. And I had no idea what that looked like. And when I remember my parents were like, you're going to go to college. And I'm like, yes, that is what one does, you know. A counselor, my parents were talking on and on about what I was going to do. And I was like, I would like to be a writer. And my dad just went, you know. And my mom's like, you could write on the side, you know. And the woman was like, you know, there are things you can do, you know, as a writer. So I wish I'd listened harder to that, though.
It's, you know, I try not to make light of this, but the reality of it is writing is a brutal profession financially. It's really, I didn't get into writing until my 30s. I just had this like thunderbolt moment, and I started writing and with zero background in it. But I had very much a business background, so I was very curious about the publishing industry. And you start to realize it's pretty terrible. It's the odds of you sustaining a decent or even any kind of living solely from selling books is not guaranteed. Getting an agent is not guaranteed. So it's I always appreciate, I think, the tenacity of writers. And Emily, your story is kind of interesting because I remember one of the times we first met, you were telling me about, you almost started writing out of spite. So tell us about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, I like to joke that I'm a recovering librarian, and I'm not. I think once you're in that profession, it doesn't ever really leave you. But when I talk to audiences, I usually like to ask the same poll that I sort of asked myself, which is, go ahead and raise your hand if you've read a really good book. Just raise your hand. Okay, raise your hand if you read a terrible book and you asked yourself, how did this get published? Right? And so somewhere in there, I'd always been a reader, a very, very avid, voracious reader, but I had never tried writing. And it wasn't until maybe 2 or 3 years into my library profession that I started thinking, gosh, I could probably write something. Didn't have any dreams of getting published at that point, but I thought I could write a story. And I don't know that I necessarily believe in any kind of muse, but right around that same time, 2 very specific sort of visions, if you want to call them that, came to me. And one was the first sentence of my first book, Inherit the Bones. And that sentence was, in my dreams, the dead can speak. And then the second image that came to me was a vision of a dead clown. So I know, Carter, you're into dead clowns. But those 2 things kind of came together in my mind, and that was sort of the impetus to a story. And I spent a couple of years, maybe a year and a half, 2 years, sort of tinkering with that and seeing sort of where I could go.
Yeah, I never want to downplay the fact that somebody writes a book. Because, you know, when I talk to a lot of my guests, it's just like, yeah, and then I wrote that book, and then like, but you wrote a book, which is, to me, it's a really hard thing to do. And especially, again, from my perspective, I had no idea what I was doing. And Emily, sounds like maybe you're a little bit in the same boat.
Oh, yeah.
And,
yeah.
You know, you start with that first sentence that you think of, and then you're like, now what do I do? How do I write a paragraph? How do I know when to end a chapter? Did you approach it from a place of like, well, let me read books about writing, let me really study it, or you're just like, I'm just going to give this a try and see what happens?
Yeah, so what I did, I didn't read books about writing. I just gave it the try. But what I did do a lot of research in was what I call the business part of being a writer. And so I did a lot of research into how do you write a query letter? What is that? How do you find an agent? How do you get published, and what does that look like? And I think during that process, to me, and you sort of alluded to it with the tenacity, what was such a shock was how long things can take.
Yeah.
I think you have in your mind, okay, you wrote a novel, it's done. it's ready to be published. It'll be on the shelf in 6 months. It might be 6 months before you get an email back from an agent you're trying to sign with.
Right.
And that's just step one. That's like step 1A.
Yeah.
So I think that to me, that was sort of the biggest surprise in the process.
Yeah. Yeah. I went through 75 rejections before I got my agent. And getting an agent is amazing, but nothing happens until that agent sells your book. So it's a terrifically long process, and you're lucky if you get an agent. Alan, I'm wondering, like, now you're teaching at an MFA program. What, and I hear about MFA programs that there's not a lot of talk about getting an agent and getting published and the realities of the business. What kinds of things are you telling your students about the world of writing that's beyond what they're actually writing?
Get out. Yeah.
Run for your life. Become an insurance salesman.
Right. It's a really interesting thing because specifically dealing with graphic novels, there's really two publishing industries. Like there's sort of the standard prose publishing industry that embraces graphic novels more recently, but then there's like the comic book industry, and they're all different people with different rules, and they all have different submission requirements. The comic book publishing industry doesn't require agents, and in fact, agents don't usually have those contacts.
Right. And
then obviously the publishing industry does require, so it's trying to figure out which one you want to go for. It's I really you tend to start with what is your goal as a writer? Because I think if you have sort of that general, I just want to be published, what does that really mean? Do you want to make a living as a writer? Because there's plenty of people who are published who don't make a living. Do you want to...
Most.
Yeah, right. Do you want to teach? Do you want what does it mean? And if you don't have a definition of what it means, then you're just going to be always reaching towards this amorphous thing. And I think so. Being clear about the goal allows you to make a plan that will get you toward, at least in the direction of the business that you want to do.
Yeah. And I hate to sound like we're very negative on writing. The reason all of it's the struggle and we do it is because we love it. There's something inside of us that's like, I write only for an hour a day, every night, and I look forward to it all day because I don't know what's going to happen. I don't outline, and I get to sit down and be like, what happens in this world? And it's so exciting to me. Erika, I'm wondering, what are the highs of writing to you? With all the struggle that it is, what are those moments where you're like, oh, this is where the joy lies?
I want to answer that question, but super quickly, I also teach at Regis, and I've been a creative writing professor in Western Illinois University for a long time. And right now I'm kind of in a battle with them about remote teaching, so we'll see what happens. But I am very forthcoming to my students or when I lecture about these realities, but I'm also like, I didn't know this. You should know this. Here's a craft book that's very basic. It's called Save the Cat. People will make fun of you for reading it, but it has a little blueprint if you don't know what that is, because I didn't. And in the literary world, right, if you're getting a PhD, people are like, plot is so Hollywood. I'm like, what does that mean? What does that mean? What, I was like, I kind of like plot, and I want to know how to do it. So, and I'm also like, oh, are you a crime writer? You should go to BoucherCon, so I'm very here are these nuts and bolts things you should know if you want to get an agent or be a professor or what have you. And also the industry, of course, has changed. You know what I read the other day? So one of my favorite podcasts is called Talking Scared. It's a horror podcast. I've been on it. It's got all the best. If you like horror fiction, he's got everybody on there. And he had Stephen King the other day, and he just about lost his, we all love Stephen King, right? So Stephen was talking about, and then later, actually, that's right, he was on Good Morning America. And I was thinking about the podcast and then what it was like to see him on Good Morning America. And he was like, well, in 1973, Carrie got me I was very poor and I was a teacher and I was barely making it. So everyone knows the story, but it's my advance was $400,000. Do you know what that is?
In 1973.
Yeah. Do you know what that is in today's dollars? It is $2.5 million. So, yeah.
The industry has changed.
Yeah, if you did a six-figure deal, now people are like, oh, my God, but that's how much has changed. So and tenure track jobs are hard to get. So the highs are, sometimes you're just writing and you're like, wow, even if later you're like, wow, that was really bad, and you have to take it out. It's that kind of like wonderful feeling like something's going well and it's beautiful. And then of course it's also, your editor emails you and they're like, you're in today's BuzzFeed, something like that. But it's also just knowing that the Native American writing world has become more than just one guy. And we do so many genres now. There's like Rebecca Roundhorse in fantasy, and B.L. Blanchard, and my partner David Haskell Wanley Wyden in crime. And it doesn't have to be this one Native explaining all of Native culture to non-Natives.
Right.
And because that's not my job as a fiction writer at all.
Right.
So I feel like that has been a big high for me.
Yeah.
Seeing that happen.
Yeah, and you can't sit there as a writer or it's very ill-advised to sit there and try to chase the market and be like, well, I think in a couple of years this is going to be hot, so let me start writing this, and because that almost never works. So you have to write what speaks to you, what gives you. I use the word joy a lot because I think that's important. What gives you joy as a writer, and you kind of honestly just hope. You hope that it's something that somebody else wants to read. But if you're not enjoying writing it, I think that totally shows in the prose. It will come off, and then kind of what's the point? Emily, I'm curious from you, like through how many books do you have now?
4 published, and
Okay.
this 5th one is out.
So now looking back,
Yeah.
what would you have changed about your own journey, if you could have, or because we all fail, we all get rejections, which are all very helpful. But is there anything you would tell your younger self starting out?
I wouldn't necessarily change anything, because I do believe you end up where you are based on everything that you learned, whether you're recognizing it in the moment. I probably would have started earlier, and I may have reached out more to peer readers. So with this 5th book that's out on submission right now, you had a chance to read it. A couple of our other vocal peers have taken a look, and that's not something I've ever done. On the first 4 books, Pam,
scary, isn't it?
It is super scary. Yeah, Pam, our mutual agent, has always been my first reader, and so with this 5th one, and it's so helpful. It's so helpful. I think I knew that it would be helpful, but having the perspective of 3 or 4 different people who I admire in the craft, and the different things that they pick up on, and it's not that you go back and then rewrite everything. But if there's themes that are coming through and you're going, I got to tap into that.
Right.
That's pretty good. So I think that would be the only thing I would change, but I wouldn't change anything about how I wrote the stories or how they came to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's something that Erika, you touched on that stood out to me. You were talking about that sort of narrow lane of breaking out of that lane of just being like a native writer that represents the entire experience. I really encountered that. I had a pretty high profile agent. He had represented like presidents and celebrities and stuff like that. Yeah. And when he went out with my stuff, he went out to all the major publishing houses. All the responses would come back like, oh, I like this, but I don't like this, or he's very compelling, but. And after a while, my agent, who's a Jewish man in his 60s, just for the context, he was like, Alan, I think that this is embarrassing to admit, but I think that because you're Black, they expect you to write about your suffering. And he was like, it's not, you talk about social issues, and you do it through the lens of sci-fi and graphic novels, but and he told me about a book that he sold from another Black author that was called something like To All the White Friends I've Lost, right?
Oh, Lord.
And, that book, fine, like that, but that's just not what I do, right? Like I'm interested in exploring my full humanity. And it seems like they think that Black is a genre, much like they might think Native American is a genre, Like, anyway, so that...
So what was your reaction to that? Like what...
It made me think, how do I step over these fools and, and figure out what I'm going to do,
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks for that.
But, and it's, it is so hard to control your destiny as an artist. And you can get so wrapped in the head of like, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to achieve. And then you start to realize, like, I can control my product, I can control my story, and that's about it. How it sells, how it's reacted to, you just have to let it go. The importance of letting go, I think, I have it tattooed on my arm, because once you're done with something that's out there, you just have to let it go. Erika, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with, do you read your reviews? Do you some people only focus on the negative reviews and they wallow for days. Some people don't read at all.
Ruthie, I wanted to say, Kids Lit is especially like that. And so I've kind of like experimented with middle grade, and like most of the native writers out there, and I'm sure like other people of color would have the same experience. I feel like my whole joke is like cultural lessons for white people. And I'm like, man, I can't do that. Like, I do have one kids book coming out, and it's about a girl whose parents one is white, one is native. And they're both aerospace engineers, because my dad was. And the girl has this really active imagination, and she likes to imagine she's on other planets. And because there's nothing wrong with, like you say, like, hey, here's some context for this that might include suffering. But just that thing makes me feel so stifled, that like cultural lesson for white people, because in the end, like a lot of even adult literature people want that. They want that. And I can't do that, and I'm not interested in it. But I've forgotten your question now.
I'm just curious to know, like, there's a lot of rejection in the industry, and there's a lot of critics in the industry, and even starting with like early Goodreads reviews, and we know Goodreads can be like a pit of shame and disaster.
Yeah.
But for example, for me, like, I always like to read kind of the reviews before the book comes out. Like the early reviews, I like to read, obviously, if it trade reviews. But once it's out, I'm kind of done. I just want to get a sense of like how it's being received, but then I don't focus on it after that. What is your approach?
I published with I occasionally would acquire an agent, and I think the same thing would basically happen. And I was also writing like what I like to call realism, and people call literary, and I don't think literary is a genre either. It's a series of conventions that can be applied to any genre. But I was writing realism. I think that was wrong for me. But so I ended up publishing with small presses, and they were very kind to me, but like the stakes are low. And once in a great while, something will boom, that didn't happen for me. But then I started writing literary horror, and I don't mean I'm postmodern. I'm not that guy. That's more like Stephen Graham Jones, my indigenous brother from another mother.
Yep.
But I'm more traditional in structure, and I had interest in publishers before I had acquired another agent. But then two agents for the first time in my life were like competing over me, and I'm like, what is this?
That's very rare.
Yeah, right. And and then the book, started to build up all these things. That was really wonderful. But with that comes a price, especially the further you get away from privilege, the more there's, white supremacists and the lateral violence come together, and they're like mash, mash, mash. So you just have to, the further you go up, the more you have to be able to sustain kind of insanity, really, just pure lies, pure insanity, pure wildness. And it is tough, but I think in the end, you either love to write or you don't.
Right.
And I don't know what that is. I can only wager a guess.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. Emily, you were talking a little bit about, beta readers, but and Erika, you had mentioned BoucherCon, which is the World Mystery Writers Convention, which is amazing. How important have you found community to be, networking? I think it's essential, as it is to any industry, but you don't really think about that with writers. You think of the writer in their little log cabin with their 1920s Royal typewriter being Thoreau out in the woods. But that's not the reality, is it?
No, it's not. And writing, I don't know if this is a shared experience, but you're so in your head. Writing is a weird thing when you think about it, because you're making up a story and you're telling it as if it actually happened. None of it's true. None of it happened, right? But to convincingly write it, it is happening, right? In your world, in your mind, it is happening. And so for me, at least, community has been huge in helping to sort of frame all that time in my head as that's okay and it's normal. And what you can learn from other writers is just invaluable, whether it's a conference, whether it's a writing group. We have so many regionally that people can get involved with. And I think it's a cause that needs to be championed over and over again. There's so much noise out there, whether it's on social media or whether it's the critics. Writing is important. Stories are important. They mean something. And I think being part of a community helps amplify that.
Yeah.
Even if you're just on the periphery, right? You don't have to be the guy standing on the center of stage shouting, but supporting it, supporting your local authors, supporting your libraries, supporting the freedoms that we have to read the books that we want. Yep. So important. And I see all
Depending
of that.
on where you live. Yep.
Yeah, I see all of that being, and we're so lucky here. I mean, if you're not aware of what's happening in some of our neighboring states, it's terrifying.
Yeah.
But being part of that community, I think, is all supporting that. And I think it's absolutely critical.
And I feel like as the years go on, you can't just write your story. There's so much more you have to do. You know, to your point, to amplify your voice is more than just writing a good story. That's the baseline minimum that you have to do. There's a lot about networking, social media, and putting yourself out there, and being volunteering with conferences and things like that. Alan, are you finding the same? Do you feel like, okay, I've got to hit all my social media channels, I've got people telling me I got to do this and this and this, or are you able to let a lot of that go?
No, I feel all that pressure. And in fact, I just posted about Goodreads. It's funny that you mentioned that. I posted about it yesterday because with my first book, I didn't even know it was on Goodreads. This is, a couple years ago. And I happened to look it up, and I was like, oh, it's on there. And I was like, oh, are people going to be mean? And actually, pretty good reviews. And there was only one person who tanked my score, and it's a person I know. and I don't think he knows that I can see his face beside the review. So I have a grudge against him. But in general, I'm fundamentally an introvert, even though I'm good at talking to people and stuff like that. If I could figure out how to Banksy this mug where people didn't know who I was and interact with my stuff, I would 100% do that. But obviously, people connect with the personality, and it helps them buy my books and, come be on this podcast, come speak here, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so I've had to lean into that a lot more. And it has its drawbacks, like white supremacists. I've gotten death threats.
Oh, wow.
But then it has the moments of, there's really wonderful moments. I'll share this one really quickly.
Yeah,
I gave at San Diego Comic-Con 2018, I sold my book to a woman who had just had 2 strokes. So she had aphasia. So, replacing words, difficulty communicating. And then I saw her the next year, and she was speaking better. And she told me that she uses my book for speech therapy.
Wow.
And so I was like, how does that work? And she was like, well, I read a chapter, my speech therapist reads a chapter, and I have to describe what happened in my own words. And she was like, a lot of weird stuff happens in your book, so that wasn't easy, But just the fact that something I created on my couch could occupy this beautiful, important place in somebody's life really feels like it's all worth it.
Right. That's what you want on the tombstone, not the insurance salesman. Right.
Yeah.
No, that makes a huge difference. Eric, I'm curious, because your partner's a writer, so I'm a little bit like Emily. My partner is the first person who reads my books, and she mostly kind of does. She gives me some feedback, but she mostly copy edits, and then my agent's the one who really reads it, aside from bits and pieces that I give to my critique group. What is your house like? What is that like being? I don't know if I can handle that.
Well, I guess I'll answer several of your questions at once, which is, I have a TikTok about this, where, that scene in The Shining where he's like, you're interrupting me constantly, and he's like, that's why. And then, and I'm like, so I can be that guy where only the dogs are allowed in the office. And I'm like an angry dad, and I close the door. But I have a great community, and I don't know what I would have done with the horror community and the Indigenous community supporting me, really towing the line. and not being jerks about like whenever I would get a thing or two. I have really close friends, and Dave is. We understand how people are like. I've heard people say things like, "I can imagine being, with another writer, but honestly, it's all I talk about. I would just be annoying to somebody else." And Dave and I are like together like all the time, like, and then this, and then that, and I didn't get that, and this, and so it's kind of nice for us. And then we do try to take time off, and we talk about not just the business or irritation side of the business of things, but also like the books we love and why. And we do look at each other's work. I feel like
during the process of writing it, or
sometimes I think what's funny is when he rose up really quickly. But when I first met him, he was really at the beginning, and he would say things I don't need to revise. And I'd be like, you do. And, but then very, very quickly, because Dave is so smart, he figured out a lot, like he helped me to reboot. He was like, these craft books are more nuts and bolts and they're more about structure. And I'm like, yes, it's exactly what I needed. Yeah. So now I feel like I'm better and better. And so when I look at his work, I'm like, oh, put this over here and do that. And I think he's good at that with me as well. Yeah.
It's fascinating to me because I'm such a solitary writer. Like, I don't even talk about my stories with anybody. Like, it's rare because it's just because I don't know where the story's going to go. I don't want to say anything because I'm like, it might be totally different. And that's why I'm almost scared to share early critique group stuff, because they'll give me all this feedback. I'm like, yeah, but those chapters are gone anyway. Yeah. So it's difficult. And I feel like you're kind of the same. Do you share with your husband or anything?
No, I'm laughing at him right now because he'll try, he'll ask sort of probing questions. And it's not so much that I don't feel as though I'm jinxing anything, but I'm like you. It feels strange to talk about it until it's finished. I'll share the premise, like with this latest one. He kind of knew the sort of the inciting incident and sort of the concept. But no, he doesn't read my stuff till it's printed and out there. And
yeah.
But then it's kind of fun because he's getting that fresh read on the product that I feel very confident in. And I think that would be hard if he was, sort of seeing draft after draft after draft, not being a fiction writer himself.
Right.
So this is more fun. And then I don't know if this also happens to you all, but by the time it's out there, you forget the story. Like,
totally.
Somebody's, I love that Alan character. And you're like, Alan? Alan.
Totally.
I don't remember Alan at all. And so that's always fun.
Yeah.
I love that you use my name as an example.
Yeah.
And then you get the opposite. You get people who who always apologize. Like, oh, I'm sorry, I haven't read it yet.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You don't have to read my books, just buy them.
Yeah,
or you get people, that's good. Yeah. I was going to say, or you get people who you don't even ask anything and they just lie to you about having read it.
Yeah.
Somebody did that to me with my TED Talk, which is hilarious to me. He was like, I haven't watched the whole TED Talk yet, but it's only 12 minutes. Like, who watches 6 minutes and I'll finish this later. It's too much.
Yeah.
You can't take yourself seriously. I think that's important. I mean, talking about your friend who left the one bad review. I remember going into a used bookstore and finding one of my books, and that's, I don't know, it's kind of exciting. You're like, it's a used bookstore, and you open up and you're like, oh, I inscribed this to a buddy of mine. I see his name. I'm taking a picture of this. You sold this for like $2. So that's always brutal. But there is a lot of rejection in this industry, and I'm a firm believer in growing from rejection and really being curious about it. And that's not to say it's not frustrating, but if you really one of the reasons I got published is because I went through all of my rejection letters from editors after I had an agent. My first 3 books didn't sell, and really analyzed them because they wrote these lovely letters about why my book wasn't right for them. And I'm like, these are learning moments for me. Erika, did you have these moments as well where you're not only learning from Dave, but learning from the industry's maybe not so positive feedback early on?
Yeah, some of it, honestly, unfortunately, half of it was kind of what Helen's describing. They'd be like, could you tell me more about the Indian dances? Or I'm an urban Indian. I'm very urban. Like, some of my family's from northern Mexico. Some of my family's from the Southeast. They met in Texas. Like, I am urban, and people don't talk about it. Like, it's like we don't exist. And Tommy Orange, I think, did some work there, but his family, I know his family actually, But he's got a different trajectory than me, although it's not entirely dissimilar. My family's always been urban. And, you know, I did it again. I have professor head. I forgot the goddamn question. I hate that.
Learning from rejection.
Learning from rejection. I was like, is that it? No, it's not it. Okay, thank you. Yeah, and so some of them were like, could you talk more about these characters from the reservation? Could you write the whole book about the characters from the reservation? And I was like, no, for every reason, no. But a lot of what they said, even if they could have just told me to read Save the Fucking Cat, sorry if I'm not supposed to F-bomb, it was, yeah, you need to work on narrative arc. I was so irritated by it, I started calling it narrative fart. You know, but they were right. But I kept asking all my friends, like, well, how do you do narrative arc? I mean, do you know? And like, the problem is I was asking a bunch of literary writers who didn't care about story or plot.
Right.
And yeah, I should have been asking the mystery writers. I should have been asking myself why I'm not writing the thing that I loved to read when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And then I started to read those things again, and I was like, I really love this. This is what I want to do.
But you bring up a really interesting point, kind of talking about maybe how quote unquote literary writer approaches fiction versus a genre writer. And I think genre is so ill-defined and bleeds through and you can't nail it down. But when I think of, for example, like narrative arc, if I started focusing on that as I'm writing, since I'm not outlining, I will get so distracted. So a lot of it to me is just, this sounds stupid, but how it feels. Like you'll have a sense of like, okay, nothing's really happening right now. And I think something needs to happen. But I don't think, for example, a character has to go through this big change at the end. I think sometimes it's just, you know, and this is just how I write. Sometimes this is just the story. And you need that feedback sometimes. But if you start thinking about a hero's journey and 3-act structure, I think it's very easy to get bogged down and lose your creative juice. Now with mystery, Emily, there is an expectation, right? And the very, very basic expectation is dead body on page 1.
Exactly. And dead
Killing its
body
on the last page.
halfway through. And that's how I plot out who's dying in that first chapter, and then somebody else better die before that midway point, or you're just solving one murder, and that's kind of boring.
That's boring.
I mean,
who wants just one murder when you can have more?
Yeah, so that's sort of how I've approached mysteries. Now with the telling, the one that's out on submission, that definitely has more of the. I feel weird even talking around the word thriller, but it has more elements of
It does.
thriller to it, and so that in writing that did require a little bit more structure around forethought of, okay, this happens over 7 days. And we know a book is about 300 pages, 100,000 words before it gets to your agent and she tells you to cut 20,000. So with that, you know, it wasn't thinking so much about any kind of a character arc or narration in those terms, but it was this book, by the nature of the story I'm trying to tell, requires a little bit more thought about the actual structure so that it has those thriller elements. It has a sense of suspense. And then it also gives the reader sort of a break in some of the chapters, because you can't have the train going 150 miles an hour, right, for the whole story.
Yeah, it gets boring.
You're going to burn your readers out. Yeah, so sort of understanding, again, in the story that you're trying to tell, how you tell that within this confined space of the box that you sort of have to work in. Right.
Now with graphic novels, what is the structure? Is it totally open, or are there a lot of rules? And you're doing your own art.
Sometimes.
Okay.
Yeah, sometimes I collaborate with other artists too.
But then that really limits, you know, it's astounding to me, because I could envision having all these ideas and you're like, oh, I got to draw all this.
Yeah, I did something for the Denver Art Museum. They had a Saint Sinners Lovers in Full show. It was like Flemish art from the 1500s, and I got a biblical iconography, and I wrote Andrew a comic for that. And I've never drawn so many camels in my life.
You're really good at drawing camels.
I'm trying to find so many different angles, like an interesting camel angle. And if you're Googling and trying to find interesting angles on camels, it's not really,
Right,
you know?
not a lot of results.
Yeah. So, you know, graphic novel is the form not really what it's the medium, right? So it was just like saying novels, right? So like anything could happen, and so it's just that it happens to have a visual component. I do need to say, I do immediately resent you when you say that you don't do outlining, but it's just
I can't. I
can't even imagine.
It's an inability of mine. So it's nothing I'm proud of.
I mean, I think it's incredible to try to balance all of those things at once. So like what makes it possible for me to construct a story is figuring out, like, I think, as a writer, you begin to figure out like what things come easily to you, what things you have to work harder for. Dialogue comes easily to me. I have to work harder for like the plot and the things that happen in it. So I try to do all of that heavy lifting in my outline so that when I have it all kind of like laid out, then it's like, all right, what are they saying? And I can just hear it, But I think it depends. Okay. I think it's important to, in this conversation, to separate art from commerce, right? Mm-hmm. Because the act of creating something is beautiful and rewarding, and it is valuable in and of itself. And we get to decide whether we want to sell that thing, whether we want to try to make a living on it. And it's important to be clear that those are separate, because if you don't have it separate in your mind, then the commerce will taint the art and it will corrupt it, and it'll kind of pull you in weird directions. My policy for myself is like to write the thing I want and then think about how I'm going to sell it. What things am I going to pull out? And so I get to choose, like, I've done horror, I've done comedy stories, I've done, I do that weekly newspaper comic for the Colorado Sun, and it allows me to do a lot of different things, and it's just what my soul is feeling at the time. And then afterwards, I'm like, this chapter deals with police brutality. Maybe I can send out a press release about that, or, whatever it is. And that usually helps me balance those two parts of this artistic existence.
Yeah. And we're going to wrap up pretty soon, but I have a couple more questions left. And I'm curious to know about your views on how linear a career path in the writing industry is, because my observation is, you don't know what's going to happen next year. There's no predicting you're going to have a great year, and then you're going to hear nothing for 3 years. And somebody hits it big, and then it goes really quiet. What is your perspective on that, Erika? Can you look at it and say, like, I see my path outlined for me, I'm pretty confident of my trajectory, or is it just who knows?
Well, I think that's just inevitable, and you just have to accept that part, even if you mourn it, when it isn't going the way you want. I publish with like micro presses, not even, when I say small presses, we're not talking about Grove or Ten House. They were Astrophil, and I love Astrophil, but they're tiny. Yeah. And so my move was so upwards. And I have to say, the one thing I can say is that I do think there are things that you can do, like analyze these rejection letters and really see what's wrong, or really just be like, you know what, maybe I need to read craft books. I had taught creative writing for over 10 years when I was like, I need to redo the way I do structure. And structure is, I think the weird part about it is that people are like, there's no art to it. It's not art when you talk about story or structure, but it is. It's its own art. And the crime writers, I admire the most, because for me, as someone who was like in academia where the questions were so, all the time, I loved E.L. Doctorow. He's like, you don't need to know the destination. It's like, writing is like driving at night. You only need to have your headlights to see some of the black top ahead of you. And I was like, no, God love you, Doctorow, but no, I wish I'd never read that. Because I have a tremendously disorganized mind, and I do need structure. And I admire, like, for example, if you're, wondering how like structure works, and someone who can just tell you exactly, besides just the basics of Save the Cat and the beat sheet chapter, there's Jane Cleland and her mastering suspense, structure, and plot. She was like, this is how you make a red herring. This is what it is. I didn't even really understand that, and I wanted to know. And she's really, really, I like the pragmatic nuts and bolts part, because I need something for my extremely disorganized head to attach to. Otherwise, it's just chaos, Interesting.
And Emily, I'm curious, from your perspective, you've gone from writing a series to writing a standalone. Mm-hmm. What was the decision behind that, and how did it feel?
It feels really good. I mean, and that's going to sound weird, because I think for a lot of authors, a series, that's sort of a golden ticket. You've got this continuing character. You've got hardcore fans of the characters. And I am very proud of the series and love the characters, but that was never my intention when I set out writing. I mean, I've got in my office at home, I've got 4 different sort of concepts, ideas, first inklings for 4 different stories that have nothing to do with each other. And I think the way that I am as a writer, I love that different stories come to me and then figuring out which ones of those might work and which ones I want to explore. So, my path has been sort of curvy. I had a very strong debut with my first novel. That was 2016 when it was published, and I was pregnant with our first child. Then the second one came out the next year. Then I was pregnant with our second child, and working full time and all of these things. And then the fourth one came out November of 2019. And then the pandemic hit. And then conversations started looking a little bit different, at least with my agent and publishing. And I think you can go sort of two ways, right? You can get disheartened by having a series that's strong and well received, but is not a Stephen King. It's not a bestseller, right? And so it may not be bringing in the dollars that would encourage a publishing house to continue with that series. However, that being said, I have a fantastic agent and a fantastic editor. And in the 4th book in my series, there were enough elements of thrillerhood and suspense that it was my editor at the publishing house that suggested writing a standalone with the thought that it may draw readers back to the series. It may not. Yeah. And I'm okay either way. Right. And so I think there's so many moments in your journey as a writer where you get to these paths of either listening and reading those editorial letters, and you can choose, they don't know what they're talking about. You go, okay, these are the experts in the industry. Maybe I should listen to them because they know what works in a story. It's not even about what might sell, but it's about what works.
Yeah. And I'll just note that it's terribly difficult to write a series in terms of approaching an agent and editor with it. Best case scenario, you have 4 books that you've written and they're ready to go. Because if you have one book and you're just like, I'm thinking about having this being a series, it's very much like, well, we don't know how this is going to sell first. So we're not going to commit to anything else. And it's really difficult to break into that as a new author. So that's amazing that your first 4 books were all part of the series.
Well, I can share something funny on that. So the first 2 books were sold in a 2-book deal based on just the first book. I hadn't written the second one yet. And Pam, our agent, said, okay, what are your ideas for the second one? And I said, okay, well, Gemma needs to go on a road trip down to New Mexico, and there's a graveyard, and there's crimes. And she was like, oh, no. With a series, you keep your characters at least in small town mystery series. I mean, 3/4 of what readers love is the sidekicks. It's the secondary characters. It's the town. And so it's you in writing a series like that, I joke that it's sort of like Murder, She Wrote, right? It's that small town with a fresh body every book or 2. But you're so right. It's very hard because along the way, you've got to have those character arcs and you've got to have growth and development and intrigue.
And you want to be interested in it.
I want to be interested. I want new characters and a new setting and a new challenge and explore different points of view or perspectives, multiple voices. Yeah.
Alan, I'm going to have the final question before our storytelling go to you and just kind of bring it full circle, very basic. You mentioned this at the very beginning about what you ask your students. So I'm going to ask you, what is your goal?
Well, that's pretty funny. All right. I think, so for me, it actually changes. The first goal was, can I make a living at this? In spite of rejections and people not rising up to help me. Like I was for sure when my TED Talk hit 1 million views and I talk about my book in the TED Talk, I was for sure that I would get a book deal. Because 1 million people know about my book, right? And now that TED Talks are like almost 3 million. Still, no publishing deal, right? So
interesting.
Yeah, so for myself, I was like, all right, well, if I'm waiting on these expletives, then I would still be selling insurance, right?
Right.
So the first goal was, how do I make a stable living? And I was able to figure that out. So now the present goal is, how do I expand what I'm doing? I'll say there's this comics creator, Mel Gilman. They introduced me to the idea of just needing a dedicated 1,000 fans. Because if you have 1,000 people who are going to buy 3 things from you a year, then you can actually make a living. Instead of being like, how can I sell 50,000 copies? Oh. Yeah. And so I really put all my efforts and like press releases and everything towards building my local following. And it has sustained me. So now it's, how do I expand?
Yep. And goals always change, don't they? Yes. I think that's important. Well, we've come to the difficult part of the program. So we've come to the part where we're going to have to make up something on the spot in front of people. So this should be interesting. I've got a selection of books that I think are kind of random over here.
Iambic pentameter we're going to do.
This can be however you want to do it. All right, Erika, give me a color.
Red.
There's not much red. Give me another color.
Green.
Green. All right. The Land of Stories, The Wishing Spell. All right. Emily, give me a page number between 1 and 400.
73.
73. You were very, very
decisive and prepared.
All right. So the way I used to do this was we would randomly select the sentence too. That's kind of a disaster. So I'm going to quickly look, and this can go any way that we want it to go. It could be whatever genre we want it to be in. Could get dark. Usually gets dark. I'm going to read a sentence, and then I think anyone can just jump in, and we'll go in some kind of order. So this is a children's book. All right. So the character's name is Connor. And maybe, Erika, if you're comfortable, I'll let you go first after I read the sentence. You just give me the next.
What do I do?
So all you do is we're just going to create a story. So I'm going to read this first sentence. That's the first sentence of the story. Just do 1 or 2 sentences. Then I'll go to Emily, and then Alan, and then me. And at some point, I'll, when we're all sweating, I'll just call it quits. Connor let out a sound similar to something a bear would make.
I have to warn you, I hate these things.
You don't have to go first.
And screamed. Yeah.
And because the face in the mirror was not his.
Yeah.
It was the face of a bear.
Connor studied the bear face in the mirror and wondered if he was still asleep. He looked down at his hands and he pinched the back of his left hand, and it hurt, but not in the way that a bear would hurt. He didn't know what had become of him.
He didn't know what had become of him?
Yeah.
He was in a alternate dimension.
And it was then that he noticed he wasn't actually alone in the room.
He noticed that his feet were paws, and the people around him, if they could be called people, were standing upright and also had animal faces.
And then he noticed at the far end of the room stood a single man, a man with a large hatchet, and he was wearing a cheetah face. The man slowly walked forward and studied Connor and said, "One of you needs to be sacrificed."
And that man was David Lynch. and he began to roll film. Sorry, I really screwed you there.
Doesn't this suck?
Yeah, it's hard.
Connor turned to the camera and then turned away, breaking script.
Then he noticed that an audience was there, waiting for him to come up with the next line in the story.
I think we call it there. Well done.
Oh, come on, it is.
It's always an interesting exercise. And you mentioned it backstage. It's a yes and. It's improv. You have to accept the other person's premise. It's so interesting what that starts to do. You almost, in some cases, you start almost having a little bit of a mind meld with somebody where you are both seeing the same thing and you know where it's going, and it's pretty magical. Other times it's just like, I don't know what to do with this. So
Everybody get a library card tonight. We are open till 9. So
Thank you, guys.
thank you all so much. This is amazing.
So that's it. That is my conversation with R. Allen Brooks, Emily Littlejohn, and Erika T. Wurth. That was a fun episode. It's a different energy when you're doing it in front of a bunch of people. But I think it went really nicely. You know, the story, doing the storytelling with 3 people, that's tough. Everyone's going in different directions, but that's also part of the joy and the fun of it. So please, I just Google their names so you could just dig into all of their histories, all of their bios, their lists of books, and go buy and support these lovely and talented writers and artists. And please skip on over to my website while you're at it, carterwilson.com, and do all the same things there. Buy my books, because, you know, it takes a long time to write a book. But it's nice for somebody to spend, you know, $10-15 on it. So, yeah, support the starving artist. That's it for now. More episodes of Making It Up will be out very soon. In the meantime, hey, thanks for watching this one. This was a fun one. Take care.